Chapter 30 On the March. Among the notable Indians with whom Swami Abhedananda came in contact in America were Pratap Chandra Mamzadar, the celebrated Brahmo preacher, and Bipin Chandra Pal, the renowned political leader. It was in 1900 that he met both of them when they visited America, and both of them have highly spoken of the excellent work done by the young Hindu preacher. Bipin Chandra Pal has recorded in his memoirs, "When I went to visit the United States of America, I learnt with great satisfaction about the missionary activities of Swami Abhedananda, a direct disciple of Ramakrishna Paramahansa. He had been there for about 4 years with the object of preaching the universal message of Vedanta, which was initiated by Swami Vivekananda. If I remember correctly, it was sometime in January 1900 that I came to New York to meet Swami Abhedananda and to gather from him some information regarding his activities in America. I met him at the headquarters of the New York Vedanta Society. I was cordially received by him, and we talked for an hour or so. It seemed to me that the gospel of Vedanta would never have traveled outside India without the efforts of the two great Hindu preachers, Vivekananda and Abhedananda. I was also taken by surprise at the interest evinced by Abhedananda regarding the political situation in India at the time. I had a long discussion with him about the future political changes in India. 3 months after I again met him at Boston, where a session of the Liberal Congress of Religion was held at the premises of the First Unitarian Church. Both of us were invited to deliver lectures at that memorable gathering. The Reverend Heber Newton, the chief clergyman of New York, was one of the speakers on the first day. Abhedananda spoke on the third day. The subject matter of his lecture was the religious conceptions of the Hindus. The vast audience present gave a tremendous ovation to Swami Abhedananda as he rose to speak. A good orator, he was, no doubt, with a good command of English. I was very much impressed in the way he presented his thesis, which showed that he was an erudite scholar. Next came my turn, and I delivered a lecture which was more or less comparative study of Hinduism and Christianity. Pratap Chandra Mazumdar, who was then staying in America as the guest of Heber Newton, was also anxious to meet Swami Abhedananda, and he was delighted to see him one day when he came to the place of Mr. Newton to meet the great Brahmo leader, who was one of the delegates at the Chicago Parliament of Religions. Abhedananda spent the night there in the company of Mazumdar, discussing with him various matters relating to the spiritual awakening in the New World. Abhedananda paid his compliments to the Brahmo leader for his work in America, saying, "I have read your Orient Christ, Mr. Mazumdar. I consider it a privilege to meet you and talk with you." These words of Swami Abhedananda, as recorded in the biography of Pratap Chandra Mazumdar, are significant. Another memorable incident during the first 5 years of his preaching in America was the celebration of the birth anniversary of Sri Ramakrishna. We gather from the Brahma Vedan, April 1902 edition, that Swami Abhedananda observed the auspicious birthday celebration of his master on 12th March 1902. It was, it should be pointed out, celebrated not only in India, but also in London and New York and San Francisco. It was in this occasion that he discussed for the first time the life of the Master before a selected gathering at the headquarters of the Vedanta Society. This was one of his important and impressive lectures, which the Swami delivered during the first 5 years of his work in America. The inquisitive readers will do well to turn the pages of the Brahmavedan in order to get the full narration of this interesting incident, which ended up with worship, meditation, recitation, and the distribution of flowers. Reporting on Abhedananda's lecture on Sri Ramakrishna on this occasion, the Sun newspaper wrote, "On March 12th, the Hindu preacher Swami Abhedananda delivered a soul-stirring lecture before a distinguished gathering at the Vedanta Society House. The occasion was the birthday celebration of his master. The Swami said in the course of his lecture, 'This saint of Dakshineswar, the greatest teacher the world has ever come to know, was the embodiment of Vedanta philosophy and realized with uncomparable charm and power the splendid symphony of the universal soul. In the teachings and life of Sri Ramakrishna, one finds a unique thing scarcely found in the world. History has no record of such a saint who stood for the harmonization of religions. We err not when we say that he was the Messiah of spiritual democracy. None but Abhedananda could say this. We have already mentioned that Swami Abhedananda was not present at New York at the time when Swami Vivekananda passed away, as he had to leave for Europe at the beginning of August 1902. Hence no memorial service could be arranged at the time. As he wanted to have some rest after continuous work for 5 years, Abhedananda decided to go to Europe, where he stayed for 2 months, visiting Liverpool and Glasgow, Manchester and London, Paris and Geneva. We gather from his diary that this short trip to Europe braced up his health. At London, he met Mr. Sturdy and other old friends. Returning from his European tour, Abhedananda's first duty was to hold a meeting in memory of Swami Vivekananda. The meeting was held under a solemn atmosphere at the premises of the New York Vedanta Society. There was a large gathering consisting of several friends and admirers of Vivekananda, and many distinguished persons were also present at the meeting. A portrait of Vivekananda was placed below that of the master Ramakrishna, and they were beautifully decorated with flowers. Swami Abhedananda inaugurated the meeting and read first the letters of Swami Sharadananda and Swami Paramahansa, written from India, both his Gurubhais, his brother disciples, and it was concerning the details of the passing away of Vivekananda. Then he spoke on the life of his beloved brother disciple. It was a brief speech, but it was pregnant with emotion. As he spoke, the audience noted that it became difficult for the speaker to subdue his feelings or to control himself. Emotion surged up in his mind, and it was with great difficulty that Abhedananda could restrain himself. In the testimony of an audience, it was a living homage to a great soul, a simple but soul-stirring speech which moved one and all. Describing Swami Vivekananda as a great preacher, Abhedananda is reported to have uttered the following memorable lines, wherein only he could say, "Swami Vivekananda, who was my beloved brother disciple, and the most favorite of the Master's disciples, was the choicest product of the age. Viewed from any angle, he was one of those distinguished sons of India who are bound to appear time after time for keeping up the spiritual dignity of the land of sages. He was nature's device for the readjustment and reinvigoration of the Indian national life. In him we have a singular and powerful embodiment of the renaissance of Indian idealism. As a messenger of Sri Ramakrishna, it was his mission to spread the light of truth and love to humanity at large." The memorial meeting was presided over by Mr. Herschel Parker, who was the president of the society. Among others who spoke on the occasion offering tributes to the memory of Vivekananda were Mr. Goodwin, Mrs. Ole Bull, Miss Josephine MacLeod. After the meeting was over, some resolutions were adopted expressing sympathy at the bereavement felt by all the brother disciples, friends, and admirers of Swami Vivekananda. In another resolution, it was urged to hold memorial meetings at the public halls and other places of America, and to raise a suitable fund to perpetuate the memory of the founder of the Vedanta Society. Before proceeding further with our narrative following the death of Swami Vivekananda, a few words should be mentioned here about the Green Acre Seminar, referred to in a previous chapter. Vivekananda was first to address the Green Acre Conference in 1894 before a group of earnest students. This beautiful spot situated in New England has remained memorable in the history of the spiritual awakening in America, in the wake of the Vedanta movement towards the close of the last century. There was a large pine tree under which Vivekananda sat, delivering his lecture on Vedanta philosophy, while the students sat around him in Oriental fashion. Since then, the tree became known as the Swami's Pine. 2 years later, Swami Abhedananda was invited here, and next came the turn for Swami Abhedananda in 1898. Thus, the Green Acre became associated with the memories of these three sannyasins who went to the New World with a new mission. Of the Green Acre School, Swami Abhedananda himself wrote afterwards, "Since the time of their inauguration, the liberalizing and unsectarian spiritual teachings of Vedanta philosophy have taken a prominent part in shaping the ideals of the Green Acre movement. The teachings of this philosophy have come from India and have represented it almost every year. Swami Vivekananda was the first among them. In 1896, his successor Swami Abhedananda came to Green Acre and took classes for 2 successive seasons. In 1898, Swami Abhedananda was followed at Green Acre by the writer of this article. During that time, he gave one lecture on science and religion before a general audience. Incidentally, it should be mentioned that Abhedananda's famous lecture on the true basis of morality was delivered at Green Acre in September 1898 for 3 days, and it was highly appreciated. In this lecture, he discussed the question with thoroughness and familiarity, along with historic development of the subject. According to the Boston Evening Transcript, they said, "It was an address of universal value." The Green Acre Movement, it should be noted here, was established in 1894, following the Chicago Parliament of Religions, with the express purpose of bringing together all who looked earnestly toward the new day and who were ready to contribute their best. The movement in the form of philosophy was the immediate result of Indian culture and thought, which preached to the West, and Abhedananda played a very important role during the period of his long stay in America to give shape and substance to this movement. We must also mention here, by way of elucidation, a few words about Swami Abhedananda's famous speech, which he delivered in 1901 before the Philosophical Union at the University in California. This speech is memorable and a historical one, and covers all the central ideas and discussions on Vedanta philosophy of India. This academic body was founded by Professor Howison, who was also its chairman. He taught philosophy at the university in California, and he was a noted philosopher of his time. Announcement columns of old newspapers indicate that the lecture was scheduled for a special meeting of the Union in the room of the Philosophy Building at the University of California at Berkeley on 6 September 1901. We gather from the accounts left by Swami Abhedananda that one afternoon he came to the California University to hear Professor Howison's lecture, accompanied by Professor Logan. The lecture being over, he had a talk on Vedanta with Professor Howison. Impressed with the learned discussion of the Swami, Professor Howison requested him to deliver a lecture on Vedanta philosophy. Abhedananda accepted the invitation and a month later delivered the said lecture. Only distinguished persons had the privilege to address the academic body that day. From the reports of the Philosophical Union, which was a unique creation of Professor Howison, we gather that many eminent scholars such as Joseph Royce and William James and others delivered their respective lectures. On September the 6th, 1901, when Swami Abhedananda came to deliver his lecture, there were assembled about 400 noted professors from different universities, while Professor Howison was in the chair. It was a memorable evening in the life of the Hindu preacher when he appeared by special invitation before this talented audience to speak on the doctrines of the most ancient system of philosophy in the world. Incidentally, it should be mentioned here that while the American press was very liberal in publishing his speeches and lectures from the beginning of his missionary work in America, no report of this particular lecture before the Philosophical Union appeared in the press, since it was on this very day that President William McKinley was assassinated, and consequently the newspapers were too much preoccupied with the news of the event. After the lecture was over, Swami Abhedananda was warmly congratulated for the brilliance of the speech, which continued for more than an hour. Of all his lectures in America, it should be pointed out this particular speech remains the most original and convincing. The claim of Vedanta was never put forth so ably as on this occasion. It also served to dispel doubts about the sublimity of Vedanta philosophy, and this particular speech of Swami Abhedananda, delivered before a distinguished gathering, went a long way in paving the path of the future Vedanta movement in America, and more intelligent people were drawn to it. Here, in the course of the illumined speech, Abhedananda said, "On the one side, Vedanta philosophy gives expression to the highest ideal of all philosophy, and on the other, it gives a foundation to a system of religion which is the most rationalistic of all systems, and it harmonizes with the ultimate conclusions of modern science and philosophy." Then the learned audience were fully convinced about the supremacy of this ancient Indian philosophy. The year 1905 was perhaps the most crowded year during the first phase of Abhedananda's work in America. In 1903, he had been in Europe and remained there for about 5 months, beginning from the month of May. It was more or less a sightseeing tour, and he covered almost all the important places of the continent. This time he was particularly delighted in visiting northern Switzerland and enjoyed the natural scenery to his heart's content. He was particularly fond of climbing the mountaintop, a habit he had developed earlier while sojourning in the Himalayan tirthas of India. He returned to America from his European tour in October and took up the regular work of the Society from November. It was at this time that there came from India a young sannyasin, Swami Nirmalananda, a disciple of Swami Vivekananda, to assist him in his work. Since Swami Turiyananda, his brother disciple, was recalled to India in June, it was left to Abhedananda to conduct the work of the society all by himself, besides his public engagements, which were then increasing. He therefore wrote to Swami Brahmananda, his brother disciple and head of the India headquarters, to arrange sending an assistant, and he deputed this young sannyasin, Swami Nirmalananda, to proceed to America. Of the disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, 5 went to America: Vivekananda, Sharanananda, Abhedananda, Turiyananda, and Trigunanitita Ananda. And those who came after were mostly the disciples of Vivekananda. What was the secret of Abhedananda's success as a preacher in so short a time? The answer is provided by the Swami himself. Once he said at the Unity Club in Los Angeles, where he was given a reception by the ministers of all churches. My only propaganda is the propaganda of truth, and I teach that no people, no place or thing have a monopoly on truth, but all have truth in the degree that we live the life and unfold the spirit from within, and that spirit leads us into all truth. Thus, wherever he went, he left a spirit of love, harmony, and a greater feeling of unity and peace. And this is why he could stay for more than 2 decades in America. In January 1905, Abhedananda was invited to deliver a lecture at the Barnes Hall in Cornell. The following account, as reported by The World of January 27, 1905, states, "Those who heard the celebrated Swami Abhedananda's lecture at Barnes Hall last evening on Vedanta philosophy and religion were deeply impressed by the appearance and ability of the speaker. They had expected a man of foreign mien, but when Professor Hiram Corson introduced him, clad in genuine Hindu attire, with brightly colored turban and tunic, the spectators were somewhat startled. The turban was of orange-colored silk, wound round his head a number of times. The tunic was long, reaching to the knees, and suggested an overcoat. It was also of the hue of oxblood, as was the brilliant sash that encircled his waist. The Swami surprised the audience by his marvelous command of English. It was the unanimous testimony of those who heard him that seldom has an American speaker at Cornell displayed such fluency and polish in using his native tongue as did this Hindu preacher. He discussed the famous philosophy of the Brahmins with rare sympathy and power. It was in the same month that the Vedanta Society held a meeting at 62 West 71st Street to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the society. The proceeding began with a memorial service for the founder, Vivekananda, and it was followed by a religious meditation and prayer. An illustration appearing in the evening daily The World on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of the Vedanta Society showed Vivekananda and Abhedananda side by side with the caption, "Old and New Leaders of Vedanta." While on a lecturing tour in the month of July, he went to Vancouver, Alaska, Los Angeles, and Mexico. There happened an interesting incident. He was traveling on the Pacific Express of the Canadian Pacific Railways when interviewed by a reporter of the Evening Telegram. The Swami, referring to the missionary work in India, declared in his sure and certain manner that it was all a mistake and that the teachers of science rather than the preachers of gospel were needed in India. He further said, "The Oriental ideals and temperament are so different from Western ideals that to attempt to impress the people there with Western conception of religion is wasted energy. The great difference between the people of the East and those of America is that America commercialism is the ideal, while in the Orient the ideal is spiritualism." To the reporter of the Telegram, Swami Abhedananda also revealed his own reaction about the Tibet expedition, which was then being undertaken by the government of India. Flinching a long tirade against the way England was managing affairs in India, he declared somewhat excited that the expedition into Tibet would result in no good to any nation, that the cost of the expedition had been immense, and it would have to be paid wholly by the people of India. He claimed that no effort whatever was being made to enlighten the people of India, and that the result was that instead of India taking a place as a great nation, she was merely a dependency teeming with ignorant millions. Such was Abhedananda. Though essentially a religious preacher, he never lost sight of the problems of India, and whenever necessary, he was critical of the alien administration of the British. If he was a sannyasin, he was nonetheless a patriot. The year 1901 saw the birth of the publication department of the Vedanta Society, along with the monthly bulletin which contained the activities of all the societies that came to existence by this time. The need for the Society's own publication department was felt by Abhedananda almost from the beginning of his work in America. And by 1905, the Vedanta movement under his leadership had gathered so much momentum that its impact was felt by the editor of a well-known paper in New York, who opened a special column in the paper. Explaining the purpose of the column, the editor, by way of appreciating the Swami's work, wrote, "We propose to reproduce in this section Swami Abhedananda through his work in the West." Short lectures of Swami Abhedananda, review of his books, and appreciations about him were published in American and London newspapers, as well as letters addressed to him by the men of light and leaders of the day. They will give the reader in full and clear the idea of the aspects of the history of the Vedanta movement in America and the great work done by the Swami there. In fact, no information about this work has yet been available to the public in India, and coming as it does for the first time, will, we are confident, prove highly instructive and interesting to our readers. When Vivekananda had first set the ball in motion, very few could then imagine that there would dawn a new era in America, an era of lectures, mostly by the sannyasins of the Ramakrishna order. Lady Gay, a noted columnist of the period, wrote in 1905, "Following the World's Fair at Chicago in the year 1893, a new era dawned in the life of the American people. The lecture habit was at its height then. There were lectures on clothes and bathing, on face treatment, on everything under the canopy of heaven. All the aftermath of the World's Fair in Chicago, where women had held great meetings and gotten saturated with all sorts of grand notions on the advancement and improvement." This Lady Gay was a columnist in the Toronto Saturday Night, and when Abhedananda visited Toronto in 1905, she met him and was so much impressed with the charming personality of the Swami that afterwards she wrote a number of appreciative articles on the activities of Abhedananda in America, which indirectly helped in spreading the Vedanta movement. "In fact," wrote Lady Gay after Abhedananda had visited Toronto, "Swami Abhedananda of India, by his lectures, has roused the interest of the American people to such an extent that he has become a part and parcel of our religious life." Here it should be mentioned that while in America, Abhedananda used to write letters to many religious-minded and intellectual people, and he always used to sign his letters Swami Abhedananda of India. Apart from giving public lectures and attending private discourses, Abhedananda was frequently invited to contribute articles in a number of papers. He was so much engrossed in his work that he could find time only at night to write these articles, which also fetched him decent remuneration. Though written hastily, these articles are no less indicative of the remarkable power of his mind. Indeed, as a writer of philosophical and religious articles, Abhedananda stands in comparison only to Vivekananda. For instance, we quote here an excerpt from an article contributed by Abhedananda in the March 1905 issue of The Intelligence, a noted philosophical journal of New York. It was on the attributes of God and man's relation to them. This article affords an interesting illustration of what seems to us to be a confusion of thought, characteristic of Oriental philosophers when they attempt to deal with religious problems by logical processes. Thus commented the paper about this article, which begins with the assertion that all people have the same conception of God. "All scriptures unanimously declare that God is spirit, infinite, eternal, and unchangeable, true and one. If you ask a Christian, a Mohammedan, a Parsi, a Hindu, or a follower of any other sect or creed, what is his God? Each one will quote passages from his scripture, giving the same answer as to what God is. The attributes of God are with each exactly the same. The Catholic priest who bows down before an image of Jesus and prays to him, burns incense and lights candles, will give the same answer. A Protestant clergyman who does not believe in any image will give the same answer. There is no difference between the God of a Christian and that of a Mohammedan or a Hindu. But still a Christian calls one Hindu and Mohammedan heathens, and they quarrel with one another, though they give the same attributes to God, and their eyes are blinded with ignorance, superstition, bigotry, and fanaticism. They cannot see that everybody worships the same God, for he is infinite. Let us stand clearly that the word infinite means that which is not limited by time, space, and causation. That which has no other cause is infinite. God is above time and space and all limitations that we can imagine. He is absolute. The infinite must be one, otherwise it is finite. If there be any other things besides that infinite, then it is no longer infinite. It is limited by that thing. Consequently, it has become finite. If we admit that God is infinite and one, we deny the existence of any other thing besides God. If we say matter is separate from or outside of God, we have made God limited by that matter. We have made him finite and made him narrow. The confusion of thought that prevails in the Western world is more or less due to its ignorance or limited knowledge about the real attributes of God. Instances of many such articles contributed by Swami Abhedananda could be cited, and which bear ample testimony of the clarity of his thinking and the precise nature of his expression. What the people of America appreciated most was the biblical simplicity of his language. Thus, when about this time in 1903 he was invited by the editor of the Outlook, a scientific journal of New York, to contribute an article, Abhedananda chose his subject, Science and Religion. After comparing the one with the other, Abhedananda concluded that both are bound to converge, saying, although some think that science challenges the authority of religion, to me, science and religion are both universal and basically very similar. We very often forget that the day is not far off when both science and religion will converge. How? Both scientific laws and religious principles have one thing in common. That one thing is faith. We all are aware of the essential role of faith in religion, but faith is essential to science too. While the basic need and nature of faith is seldom reorganized, can anybody deny the faith is absolutely necessary for the scientist even to get started? And deep faith is necessary for him to carry out his tougher tasks. It is surprising to note that what Abhedananda assessed at the dawn of the 20th century has now come to be accepted universally. Thus, during the first 10 years of his stay in America, Abhedananda succeeded so much in achieving his mission that it will be no exaggeration to say that if Vivekananda electrified the Western world, it was Abhedananda who put in more voltage in the electrification, which started by his predecessor. The propagation of the universal gospel of Vedanta, according to Swami Abhedananda, owed much to the constructive genius and endeavors of Swami Vivekananda, as well as himself. A man of rare power and unquestioned sincerity, Abhedananda, who worked all the years quietly and modestly, was the burden bearer in chief after the death of Vivekananda. What were the secrets of his success? According to a correspondent of the New York Tribune, who said, "The Hindu sannyasin Swami Abhedananda, who is doing much good work in this and other Occidental countries for the past 10 years, is now regarded as much sought after. His mission is peace, knowledge, and truth. The Swami does not mix with politics. His set aim is to bring spiritual upliftment and regeneration to all of humanity. A man of winning personality, he has free access to the social and domestic life of the American people, who fondly call him Prince Abhedananda. True, he has no princely kingdom, but a spiritual teacher of his stature is really a prince of men. It is his loving attitude to all and his smiling countenance that have won for him an enviable position as a preacher." We also gather from similar accounts given by many other distinguished persons who had the privilege of coming in close contact with Swami Abhedananda that he was all humility and at the same time all strength. Whenever he talked to anybody, he talked with fire and enthusiasm, and he would lose himself entirely in the subject, forgetting everything else for the time being. He impressed everyone who heard him, and all classes of people felt attracted towards him. Everyone regarded his company as precious. As a preacher, Abhedananda had some higher qualifications. These gifts or powers that he developed through a long period of self-discipline and mental control. There are innumerable instances that whenever anybody asked him any question, he would at once answer not from the intellect, but from within. In answering a question, he used to speak just a few words which could give so much satisfaction to the questioner. And how effective were his answers! None but a person being highly trained and of concentrated mind can perform this miracle. Many students of Vedanta have admitted that Abhedananda, who possessed rare insight, always used to keep his eyes to the questioner, and his answers would come like flashes of illumination. This was always the case with him, whether answering questions from the platform or in the classroom. Once it so happened that someone asked Swami Abhedananda after his lecture why he had answered a certain question in the way he had done. And he said, "Because it was the answer you needed." And this accounted for his phenomenal success as a preacher in America.